and over the offseason, what are the things that you want to talk about?
I think there's a few interesting things. Obviously there's the strategy of how you're going to structure your team. I think that's always interesting, and it changes every year. I think the most interesting position is quarterback, because I think there's a consensus big three with Manning, Rodgers, and Breeze in some order. And then 4 through maybe 12, there's a lot of debate. And I see all sorts of guys going fourth and all sorts of guys going 9th or 10th or 11th that people really disagree about. And I'll give you an example. Dalton Del Don actually has Brady as his number 4. I have seen Brady often outside the top 10. I think we have Brady at 6 or 7. Had to give RG3 one extra rushing yard to make his projection slightly ahead of him for the magazine. And I think there's a lot of debate. I have Nick Foles as my number 4. I don't think a lot of people have Nick Foles as the number 4 quarterback. So I think there's a lot of interesting ways to go there. It does say, wait on your quarterback, especially if you don't get one of the big 3. There's no reason to take a fourth one until, who knows, 7th, 8th round, depending on how deep the league is.
Right. And, the funny thing is we say this every year, but it's true. Even though there's not much to distinguish quarterbacks 5 through 12 on draft day, it's going to make all the difference in the world which one you get. Eli Manning was the seminal example last year. Sure, you wait on the quarterback, say no problem. You get Eli Manning, no problem. Except Eli Manning was a disaster last year.
Yeah, that was really bad. It was also bad as he had a good first game or two, and that
right.
Made you think, okay, he'll be fine. And then by week 6 or 7, you're out of it, and it's too late to figure out what you did wrong. I'll make the case for a couple of these guys and against a couple of these guys. I know a lot of people have Stafford in the top 5, and I really want no part of that in the top 5. It's fine at number 9. I think his volume will probably make up for most of his flaws. But Nick Foles is my number 4. If people don't think realize how good Nick Foles was. If you look at the top 5 most efficient quarterback seasons of all time in NFL history, okay, there are seasons like Peyton Manning's 2004 season when he had 9.1 yards per attempt and threw for 49 touchdowns. That's one of the top 5 most efficient seasons ever. Interestingly, last year was not. He broke all the records, but he did it on a lot of volume. He was only at 8.4 yards per attempt. Wasn't that efficient. I mean, he was very efficient, but not all-time efficient. He was in 2004. Aaron Rodgers, when the Packers were 15-1 in 2011, is one of the most efficient seasons of all time. He did in 15 games, had like 45 touchdowns, not very many picks. Dan Marino, 1984, especially if you adjust for era, that's one of the most efficient of all time. I think Brady's 50 touchdown 2007 qualifies, or maybe it was the 36 touchdown 3 interception year he had a few years ago, or whatever it was. Those are among the most efficient. But in that top 5, believe it or not, if you look at efficiency ratings and different types of advanced metrics for QBs, you will see Nick Foles 2013. He had 27 touchdowns and 2 picks. He had a YPA of 9.1. Okay? When you have 9.1 YPA and you are not throwing interceptions, that is incredibly efficient. The other thing about Foles is he runs. He had 200-plus yards and a couple of rushing touchdowns last year in 10 starts. Okay? This is an offense where the quarterback does carry the ball occasionally. He's not especially nimble, but good enough. So you're talking about a guy who was 27-2 in 10 starts. Okay? He's in one of the best offensive systems imaginable, and he runs for touchdowns, and the system calls for the quarterback to run a bit. I could see maybe not top 3, but I don't see much more than top 4, top 5, top 6. I don't see how you slot him any further down.
Right. I'll say this. I wonder how much the second year is going to be for him. We saw the playoff game where he was, I don't remember exactly what his numbers were in the playoff game, but I don't recall him being awesome. That they did lose a home playoff game to the Saints. And it was kind of maybe weather was an issue. I forget all the circumstances, but I keep thinking that there's reasons to pump the brakes. That maybe it's at his absolute peak value. You don't want to invest in him at his peak value. But then again, I look at your projection for him, and you've got him at 33-11. That's a reasonable regression.
If you were to pay for his prorated stats from last year, he would be a top 5 overall pick, maybe top 10. Okay, because he would probably have 45 touchdowns if you prorate the touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and he'd have 3 rushing touchdowns or 4 rushing touchdowns and 400 rushing yards. You're not going to have to pay. You're going to pay a regressed price. right? You're not going to have to pay for last year's stats prorated over 16 games. You're just not going to have to do that. You're not going to have to come close to doing that. So there's no sense, there's no real buy high. This isn't like a buying high because his price tag hasn't gone up that much. People think, well, he didn't play a full season. Well, to me, you and I get in these debates. If a guy hits 20 home runs in half a season, does that mean anything? If a guy strikes out 15 batters in a game and then he strikes out 13 the next game, does that mean he's suddenly elite? Are there signature starts? And I think you and I both agree that there's two variables. One is the size of the sample. Okay, it's 10 starts. It's not very much, 11 games, 10 starts. And then there's the magnitude of the sample. What did he do in those 10 starts? It's not just, oh, he's above average for 10 starts. That wouldn't really mean much. But if you are 27-2 with 9.1 YPA, the magnitude of that has to make that sample much more significant than it would otherwise be.
Right. And more often than not, that model works. There are exceptions to that. Joe Mauer hitting for power is one of them that comes to mind for me.
28 home runs. That's not a huge magnitude, right? I mean,
compared to his previous output, it was, but compared to what another player could do, it wasn't. You're right. And that's probably the difference there. And there is no previous on Foles. That's the other thing. It was more, this is his shot. He had, how many games did he play in his rookie year? 2?
Nothing. Yeah, nothing significant. I mean, think about Jose Bautista. Compare it to Jose Bautista's 54 home runs. I know it was a full season rather than 2/3 of a season, but people really did not believe in Jose Bautista. They thought the whole year they didn't believe, and the next year they didn't believe. But the reality is,
he was a 4th-round pick. That
home run.
4th, 5th-round pick. Yeah.
Not hit 54 home runs in this day and age. 54 now is much more than 50 or 51 in 1996. So, that's to me that's significant. And so I would regress him. I don't think he's going to throw 45 touchdowns, but as you said, 30 and 11, and then some rushing yards or rushing TDs. And in that system, it's so good and running. I mean, the problem with the Tom Brady's of the world and Drew Brees and the Peyton Mannings, they get 0 rushing yards. Manning didn't need them. Brees doesn't need them last year. But if they do slip a little, they don't have any of that to boost them.
Could you argue that keeps them healthier, though, because they're not running?
You could absolutely argue that. And actually, Jeff Stotts, in his article for the magazine, demonstrated that there's a 15% higher risk once a quarterback averages X amount of rushes per game, on average. Obviously, if you rush it even more, there's more risk. So, yes. So there's slightly more risk with Foles getting hurt. I would agree with that.
All right. And the thing is, I'm pretty much on board with you on Foles. I grabbed him in our mock that we did for the magazine, the one that I participated in. I'm curious to see what this offense without Deshaun Jackson looks like. But then again, year 2 of their tight end, they added another running back. They added in Sproles. I mean, that should help the passing game some too. That should help Foles' efficiency and also probably prevent him from running a little bit too, which will keep him healthier. Might cut down his rushing yards a little bit. Maybe I don't think the rushing TDs that he had are going to continue. Didn't he have 4 rushing TDs or something like that? I don't think that continues.
I think I gave him 2 this year, though. I think they call running plays for the quarterback. It's one of their options. They do let the quarterback run. So I don't think that's a fluke. He's going to get 4, but he'll give him 2. That matters. That's like 3 passing touchdowns.
Yeah, and for the record, he had 3 rushing touchdowns last year, so not that big of a difference.
In 10 games, 10 starts.
Yeah.
So, I'm giving him 2 over 16. So I think that's safe bet.
All right.
And he could have more. Okay.
All right. So what quarterback's going to be a disaster? Who's the Eli Manning of this year's draft class?
I don't really see a real disaster from any of these top guys. Some guys I don't like. I don't like Peyton Manning where he's going. There were just so many things that had to go right last year. There is absolutely no guarantee that he continues that production. The offensive line could be better with Ryan Clady back, but a couple things. If you look at the receivers, I think they missed 5, and Julius Thomas combined, they missed 5 games collectively between all of them. That's pretty nice. I mean, easily Demaryius Thomas misses 4 or 5 games, or Welker misses games at age 33, or Julius Thomas, who's been a little dinged up, misses games. Then that's going to hurt a little bit. 2, they lost Decker. I don't think that's that big a deal. They got Emmanuel Sanders. They drafted a rookie, so I think they'll probably be okay in terms of depth. But everybody stayed healthy for them. Manning stayed healthy. He didn't really take any huge hits. He does get rid of the ball quickly, but you never know in an NFL season. And I just think maybe they score more rushing touchdowns once it's Monte Ball and not Sean Moreno, and Monte Ball may have a little bit more burst and a little bit more tackle breaking ability near the goal line. I just think overall you have to regress Manning significantly just for historical purposes. Also his age. I mean, he's 38 now, coming off the neck surgery still. I don't think it's hampering him, obviously, but it just makes him maybe a little bit bigger risk if he takes the wrong kind of hit. But you just regress anybody who sets a record no matter what. That's just, outliers like that are rare, and regardless of, even if everything was exactly intact, you would still expect him to throw 45 touchdowns this year. And then if everything doesn't go just so perfectly, and the Denver defense has upgraded a lot, and that was helping them get into shootouts and run less in the end of the games, I think I have Manning in like the low 40s for touchdowns, which is still good, but there's going to be a lot of quarterbacks with good stats, and some of whom run. So I'm not taking him where you'd have to take him. So that's not a disaster. I just think he's going to be, more back to the pack. I don't like Matthew Stafford unless he's 9th or 10th. People say, well, look at it now. He's got Golden Tate and Eric Ebron. Well, look, rookie tight ends almost never do anything. They almost never do. So that's one thing that I don't really care about. 2, Golden Tate is going to be a big upgrade over what they had. Maybe. But maybe the reason that they couldn't find a second receiver opposite Calvin Johnson playing in an indoor stadium is because Stafford's just not that good. Because he didn't make somebody a good second receiver. How can an NFL receiver playing opposite a guy who's getting triple teamed indoors in ideal conditions not be good? Because your quarterback's not that good. He doesn't just throw to whoever's most open. He targets guys. He locks in on Calvin. So I think some of the blame is on him. 3, Scott Linehan is gone. You'll say, oh, it's great. Joe Lombardi from the Saints is going to install Drew Brees' offense in Detroit. Well, first of all, Matt Stafford may not be as good as Drew Brees. May not be able to really run that offense.
Might not.
Right. Is not. Right. Is not as good. And he's not going to be able to run it as efficiently. And, but he'll get tons of attempts because they got the Saints offense. Well, Stafford had the most attempts in history 2 years ago, the 4th most in history 3 years ago, and the 17th most in history last year. They're not going to throw it more. They might throw it less. They're definitely not going to throw it more.
I agree with all that. And I think you and I have been kind of on board with Stafford all along. I think there's a right price for him, and I think the volume will come. I think it'll be very close to the same. I don't think it's going to drop much, but you're right. It's not going to go up. It's certainly not going to go up. Maybe the efficiency will go up. Maybe he'll find a way to get him to listen a little bit better than Linehan did, but probably not. Another quarterback situation I wanted to pay attention to, you mentioned Eric Decker, and he's going to the Jets. He's going from the best situation in Denver to one of the worst with the Jets. But they did bring in Michael Vick. And I know it's not a guarantee he starts over Geno Smith, but I'm kind of intrigued with Decker if it's Vick and not Smith. I still think there's almost going to be too much of a discounting when it comes to Eric Decker.
That's certainly been the case. I can't remember. I think it was Bob Harris took him in the FSTA draft right before I took Sammy Watkins. And Bob afterward was apoplectic. He was so mad that he did that. He's like, why did I take Eric Decker? I should have taken Watkins or whoever else he wanted. And it's like, because Decker was the guy on the top of his list, and he was above Watkins, I believe, on my list by like a little bit, because you're doing projections, and who knows with the rookie and EJ Manuel, Eric Decker, look at the huge numbers he's put up the last 2 years. You just put him up there, but nobody really wants him, and so he is being discounted. And maybe by the end of the year, Bob will say, oh yeah, that's why I took Decker first. He's an established receiver who knows how to play in the NFL. I think, though, that it's a hard sell because the Jets have not really had a number one receiver produce anything significant. Maybe Braylon Edwards was okay a couple of years ago, but not much. Antonio Holmes was okay before he got hurt or after a suspension or whatever, but not much. So, it's kind of hard to see a receiver thriving there, and that may be where the discount is because, of course, it's totally things change so much every year. You can't just say, well, the Jets, there's no receiving production there. That's the case for a while, and then suddenly it's no longer the case. It changes all the time. So maybe. It's just hard to make a case for a guy who's not especially fast. He has decent size. He's used to being single covered. He had the best quarterback in the game who looks – the difference, I think, between a Breeze and a Manning and these other guys, even Vic or Stafford or whoever, is I don't know how well they go through their progressions. They don't necessarily say, okay, there's 4 guys running routes right now, and I'm going to be able to see what everyone's doing and throw to whichever one is most open and know how to read how the defense is playing them on this snap and get the ball in the hands of the guy who's open. And with these other lesser passers, Do they really do that? Are they really able to go through progressions and find the open guy? So Decker may have been open because he wasn't getting that much attention, and Manning would keep delivering him the ball. What's going to happen when he's covered or double covered? Is he able to get open, and is the quarterback going to throw a ball that's catchable for him?
Right, exactly. And it'll be interesting seeing that development. But I do think that there is a lot of latent talent there. He wasn't solely a creation of Peyton Manning. That, yes, he enhanced his qualities, but I just tend to think that there's more talent there than I think he's being given credit for. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up on a handful of my rosters. The thing is, the price is always going to be right. I'm never going to have to pay very much to get him.
Right, but maybe you get what you pay for it, too.
It's possible.
All right, let's talk about some other quarterbacks. As I said, Dalton likes Brady as his number 4, and I think that's really interesting. Brady was bad for a large portion of last year, still finished with like 25, 26 touchdowns. Gronkowski only played a handful of games. If he is healthy, that's huge. But remember, Shane Vereen missed 10 games last year. Aaron Dobson was a rookie, and he was injured. He's now healthy, or supposedly going to be healthy by training camp at some point. And he's got the size-speed combo to really stretch defenses. And they're going to have Danny Amendola, who was totally hurt, not himself last year. And they developed Edelman into sort of a reliable dump-off threat. Brady was a top 5 quarterback, top 3 even, every single year. And suddenly he has one off year where he had nobody to throw to, and he's slipping to outside the top 10. Where do you take Brady?
Inside the top 10. I might not go 4, but I don't think I'll have to in many cases unless I'm playing against Dalton. But look at the game log from like week 9 through week 15. Most of those games are where he had Gronk. 432 yards against Pittsburgh, 296 against Carolina, 344 against Denver on that night game. They were playing catch-up in that one. Against Houston, 371 yards, 418 yards against Cleveland and Joe Hayden. At Miami, 364 yards. So he had that stretch where it's over and over, a lot of good production there. And the YPA was pretty strong in all those games. Maybe one of those it wasn't so great, but that was vintage Brady. Now the Baltimore game was awful at the end in Week 16. It kind of killed all the momentum. But Gronk was hurt again at that point in time too. So I think Gronk is going to be a huge key to this, but also having an offseason to prepare for a little bit more for what those options he'll have. I think know Dobson better. Dobson will be healthy. I tend to be pretty bullish on him. I think that, and I think a lot of people are going to say, oh, he's older. It's the next progression. What's the next step down for him? I could see arguing. So I feel like that there is a buying opportunity here.
Yeah, he's a little bit of the Justin Verlander of football this year, right? He had a bad start, and he kind of fixed it late. But, and he's sort of at the crossroads. I'm not saying he's going to have the same fate as Justin Verlander, but he's kind of that same kind of guy, the reliable ace for so long that seemed to right the ship in the second half. So Brady's on.
Let me interject real quick. We have pitch FX, where we know all about like Verlander's fastball velocity. We know a lot more about the quality of his pitches. Do we know like the arms, Brady's the speed of the balls he's throwing? His accuracy on deep balls. Exactly specifics on how far he can throw. That's the sort of thing that I think isn't analyzed a lot, at least not in the public sphere. I'm sure that there are outlets for that, but I think that's like one of the areas where we can gain a little ground on our competition if we know these sort of things a little bit. How much does he age?
I'm sure that data's out there, but I don't know how significant it is. I mean, I don't really think quarterbacks lose that much arm strength as they progress through their careers. I mean, it's not like pitching a baseball, which you're throwing 110, 120 pitches in a game sometimes at ridiculous velocities over and over again. I know they throw a lot. I mean, throw a lot during the week and in practice, and they got to zip that thing in there. But I just don't think nearly the same kind of wear and tear throwing a football than it is throwing a baseball for a pitcher. So I don't really think their velocities decline. There was talk that Eli Manning's velocity, the fastball, had been lost, but he had an ankle problem. Maybe he wasn't really stepping into it as much as he needed to. That could have been part of it. I would be surprised if, I'm sure that data is out there and they have velocity, and that's just sort of gives you a baseline skill set of arm strength.
Yeah. I'll give you one example where it mattered. Carson Palmer, when he suffered his elbow injury, when those first couple of years when he came back, that out pattern, he did not have the zip on it. That was the pick six ball, and that happened a lot of times. The soul-killing pick six ball. Let's get it by its proper name. And we saw that with his last couple of years with the Bengals, his year with the Raiders. He got better towards the second half last year with Arizona. I wonder if he's healthier than he was in the past. or if it's just an adjustment. I mean, you look at his overall numbers: 24 touchdowns, 22 picks last year. He was completely inefficient. I want to. That's a guy where I'd love to see the metrics on that guy. See if that correlated with all of his problems.
But he also had 7.4 yards per attempt in a tough defensive division. So he didn't he threw too many picks, as always. And to me, usually that's decision-making more than arm strength. I mean, obviously, if there's a decision to make, do I have the arm to get this ball out there?
Right.
That's not the pattern I should be throwing. I don't think Chad Pennington was throwing a lot of 15-yard outs because he didn't have a very strong arm. He was just smart enough not to do that. So I think it's mostly decision-making, the pick sixes and the picks.
Probably right about that. Because if
probably
you look
bites
at
you once. You throw in practice, so you know what you have, right? I mean, it's not like you don't know that you can't get that ball out quickly. So it's a judgment call, right?
Mm-hmm.
And usually a lot of the guys who have huge arms throw interceptions, like Jay Cutler and Brett Favre, because they had such guns, they thought they could squeeze the ball in to a place that they couldn't, right? And so those guys end up throwing a lot of picks, the guys with the big arms sometimes.
Well, Palmer was one of those big arm guys when he was first drafted. When I think before the elbow injury, he was that way with the Bengals.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think arm strength to me is a huge important factor, except it has to be above a certain floor. Right. I think Chad Pennington, when he came back from the injury, the shoulder injury, it was below the floor. He couldn't function anymore. It was just too little. But I don't. Joe Montana never had great arm strength. I don't think that he's adequate, but Tom Brady's never been known for arm strength. Peyton Manning is not a guy with huge arm strength. Drew Brees doesn't have especially great arm strength. Oddly, Russell Wilson does. Aaron Rodgers does. But I don't think there's a huge correlation between arm strength and quarterback success, so long as it's above a certain floor. And I don't think there's any good evidence that Brady is at risk of dropping below that floor of arm strength.
Right. I'm not asserting that Brady does. It's more just I think it's always one of those things. I think we should be ever vigilant. Look for new methods. That's all.
Yeah. Well, I would like to get the data. It would be nice. I know Kaepernick throws a real fastball. He has a huge arm. But a lot of it's touch. A lot of NFL's timing and touch more than velocity. And a couple other guys I want to talk about. RG3. Now, I would not be surprised. I don't think that many people would be surprised if RG3 was the number one quarterback on the board in 2015, because he can run for 700 yards if he runs. He can score 6 or 7 rushing touchdowns. And yet he also had 8 yards per passing attempt his entire rookie year with nobody, with no tight end. He had Fred Davis, who got hurt halfway through the year. He had Roy Halou, who was hurt his rookie year. Pierre Garçon wasn't even on the team his rookie year. And he had a great year, for the Redskins. Last year, he gets Garçon, who he kind of locked in on a little too much. Jordan Reed for half a season before he got hurt. And Halou was healthy, and he was coming back from the knee injury. Now his knee is supposedly completely healthy. He shed the knee brace. He's got Garçon. He's got Deshaun Jackson. They added Andre Roberts for the slot. Jordan Reed is now ostensibly healthy for the whole season, start of the season at least. And they have Halou still as a good pass-catching running back. And they have Jay Gruden, who made Andy Dalton into a good fantasy quarterback. So where do you have RG3 ranked?
He's a tough one because I want to see how he looks like, how that knee holds up. Like training camp, that's one where I will be paying attention to training camp in the preseason as best I can. Because he came back too soon last year, because it seemed pretty obvious to me that he was affected by that as it went on. And then the soap opera around him certainly didn't help either. But yeah, I mean, all the pieces are in place for him to have a lot of guys, a lot of assets to use. So, yeah, this should be a breakout possibility for him. And I understand why you're bullish on him. I also think that his decision-making skills might be called into question a little bit there too, though. Maybe he tries that, I want to see how well he can get away with his secondary reads, avoid forcing the ball in certain situations, because I think that was at issue last year.
Yeah, I mean, there's always some sort of, you can make up something, but I think
I take Brady over him right now.
I take him slightly over Brady. I think the injury risk is obviously higher. That's the only concern, but not, he's now a year and 9 months removed from the ACL. He's better. It's better. Mm-hmm. That's how long. It usually takes a year, maybe a little over a year. Adrian Peterson screwed everybody up by recovering like that and made people think last year that RG3 was going to be like Adrian Peterson. Wes Welker did the same thing a few years ago and was not himself that year he came back. He was not himself. Right. And the following year he was himself. And that's the normal pattern. is the year after, if it's less than a year, they're not themselves, then they finally are the year after that. And so, just the Adrian Peters thing messed things up. But I think he's like C.J. Spiller. He's like a couple guys where you just throw last year out. Forget it. Okay, it doesn't mean anything. It was just a year where it wasn't him. He was trying to play through something he couldn't play through. All right, so we talked about a bunch of these guys. Matt Ryan, I think if Julio Jones is 100%, is a rock. I used to make fun of Matty Ice, Vanilla Ice a lot. But I was impressed last year what he did with no receivers when Roddy White was gimpy and there was no Julio Jones. And he made some great throws. He hung in there. He took a lot of beatings. The offensive line wasn't good. And I actually gained some respect for him. So I think that I would take him over Stafford, straight up, Matt Ryan.
Yeah, I would do so if Julio Jones proves to be 100%. Hopefully that's another situation preseason that we'll be able to see a little bit more of there. Yeah, I hate trying to look at the preseason because most of the time it's garbage. Starters play one series a down, sometimes two, sometimes none at all. A.J. Green didn't play the preseason at all last year. And so sometimes, the Bengals 2 years or 3 years ago were like the worst team in creation in the preseason. Then they turned around and made the playoffs. So it can be a big mirage, but I am going to try to see, read as much as I can about guys like RG3 and Jones when it comes to training camp, preseason, all the practices, just to see how the health is.
I'm going to leave you with one last guy I think is a sleeper to be the number 1 overall quarterback this season, and that's Tony Romo. I'm very worried about his health. I have him ranked low in the rankings because I think coming off the back injury, and they're going to have to throw a lot because their defense is horrible. It projects to be horrible with Sean Lee out, and it's just ugly. I think they're trading for Rolando McClain now or something to try to get someone to fill in, and it's not. They have to trade like a 6th-round pick or something. But they're in trouble defensively, and I think Dallas is going to have to throw a ton. And Terrence Williams is a stretch the field guy. Des Bryant is the do-everything guy. Jason Witten's super old, but he's still there. DeMarco Murray, if he's healthy, he's still a good pass catcher. I think that they may. And Gavin Escobar, I think it's his 2nd year or 3rd year. He's got another tight end weapon they have. I think Romo is going to, if he's healthy, push for 4,800, 4,900 yards, and just have to throw all day. The risk is when they're behind all the time and the team knows they're going to throw. You take a lot of hits as a quarterback, and he's been known to take some big hits. But I think Romo is a sleeper. I know he's not a sleeper, but you're going to get him in round 7 or so, and he may get some volume like he's never had before. And he's a very good quarterback whenever he's healthy.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong about that. The couple things that haven't changed, Jason Garrett is still the head coach there. I hope that offensive line can protect him a little bit better this year. Tony Romo is 34 years old. What you see is what you get in terms of his maturity, in terms of his decision-making skills. So I don't think there's a upswing in efficiency, but I think it will come from the attempt side of things. Like you said, Sean Lee's already out for the year. Yeah, if they're falling behind a lot, you could see him throwing a ton, which is funny. He might have one of his best years, and people still might be calling for his head because I think Dallas, there's potential they could be a really bad team if that defense is really bad.
Yeah, it's not a good recipe to have your quarterback throwing the ball 50 times a game in catch-up mode, but it's great for fantasy.
Right.
It's really, and I bumped Des Bryant above A.J. Green for that reason. I just thought, you know what, Des Bryant is going to get a lot of targets this year if that defense plays out as projected.